Thank you. Thank you. Very generous. Thank you. Please. Thank you, Tom. That was a powerful introduction and powerful remarks. It's good to be with you today. I get asked on a regular basis, boy, why aren't you running this year? I ask myself that now and then, too. But I did that once. You may not have known that. I'm asked, why did you lose? And I do remember the famous line by Fritz Mondale after he had the misfortune of running against Ronald Reagan. He said, you know, all my life, I've wanted to run for president in the worst way, and that's just what I did. I learned from my experience a greater degree of optimism about the future for the country. We are a great people, and we have characteristics which will allow America, in my view, to lead the world this century and perhaps beyond. And I say that in particular now because we're going through a dramatic change in the nature of competition and enterprise in the world. And that change is associated with innovation. We've been innovating on a, if you will, a linear basis over the last 100 years, and now we're shifting into an exponential basis of change and innovation. And that because of the ability to categorize and collect enormous amounts of data, to process it in devices in our hands and will ultimately be injected in our bloodstream to look at our health and so forth. Our cars will not be driven by humans, they'll be driven by machines. The world is going to change in extraordinary ways that are hard to predict. In an environment like that, a nation which is an innovative nation should win. And that's exactly what we are. No nation is as competitive as we are in creating new enterprises, new businesses, new technologies. And I don't know why that is. I think part of it is just in our DNA. The great majority of our ancestors that have come to this country have come here for opportunity. Of the 25 largest market cap high-tech companies in America, 60% of them were started by first or second generation immigrants. It's in our DNA and our culture. Our legal system encourages innovation. Our bankruptcy laws, for instance, allow people to take risk without becoming personally devastated if the risk doesn't pay out. Our government has not placed a heavy hand over the years on picking winners and losers, and that's allowed people to have the freedom to innovate and to create change. Our educational system creates not only research centers, but students with great skill and capacity. And our financial structure. We have all sorts of capital. We have venture capital and LBO capital, and we have mezzanine debt and senior debt. We provide all sorts of financing to people and companies that have ideas. And so in my view, this century will remain an American century. The only thing that could mess that up is that if government can't deal with the inevitable challenges that any great society confronts. We've had challenges in our past, and we've ultimately overcome them one after the other. And right now, we've got a whole stack of challenges, and incredibly, our federal government seems incapable of dealing with the major challenges that the country faces. And if you think for a moment, what do you think are the biggest challenges that America confronts? And I've asked a number of people this and put a little poll together and written them down and then looked at them one by one. And let's just go through them. As a good Republican, I'll start with debt. The debt held by the public right now, the governmental debt held by the public is about 70, 80% of the GDP. It's forecast over the next few decades to get to 200% of the GDP. And you know why. That's, of course, an unsustainable level. The reason, of course, is because the non-discretionary items in federal spending, which represents 2/3 of federal spending, entitlements primarily and interest, those continue to grow at a rate which far outstrips the rate of growth of our economy. And yet there is virtually no effort that's been undertaken, at least in the last 8 years or so, on either side of the aisle to find a way to stop the creep of the growth of these non-discretionary programs. There's been no proposal that's made any progress at all with regards to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. We know how to solve those problems. There just isn't the will in Washington to deal with them. Let's take another issue, poverty. Look, when I was a young man, 1965, graduated from high school, LBJ declared the war on poverty. We've spent trillions of dollars to fight poverty, and we have record numbers of poor people in America today. Percentage of people living in poverty is the same as it was back in the 1960s, around just a little under 15%. Let's take another challenge that we face, and that is tougher competition in the education world for young people around the world. In 1970, the cost of educating a child K through 12 in today's dollars was $57,000, K through 12. Today it's $164,000. So we've tripled the amount per student we spend for a child going to school. We've doubled the number of educators, doubled the number of people who work per student, and how the kid's done. Test scores in English, math, and science haven't moved at all. We know how to fix K through 12 education. There just doesn't seem to be the kind of will to actually do what's necessary to fix it. Income inequality. Income inequality hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse. And yet no proposals that would suggest how we could really attack the roots of the fact that people in the middle incomes and the lower incomes in America aren't seeing the progress they expect and need. Our lead militarily, another challenge. We're facing a much more assertive China. We're facing an adventuresome Russia, someone like Peter Zeihan, who wrote the book, what's it called, Accidental Superpower. He said, look, Russia will collapse in 8 years. Russia will collapse in 8 years, he writes, unless Russia takes over population and territory from some of their former satellites. And that's what they've been doing. Other challenges, of course, ISIS and the threat of radical jihadism around the world. So massive challenges, and yet despite all that, we continue to shrink our military footprint and capacity. Another challenge that is not being met. I'll mention one more, and that is the ability of America to compete. American competitiveness. Have we made it more attractive to compete in America or less attractive? I think you know the answer to that. When you hear about companies doing something called inversions, that suggests that people are deciding it's better to be outside America than inside America. And when politicians are saying, oh, we've got to make it illegal for them to do that, or tax them when they do that, we got to stop them from leaving. It's like, guys, if they're leaving, don't try and keep them from leaving. Instead, figure out how to make them want to stay. Make it more attractive to be here in this country. In our tax environment, our regulatory environment, our legal environment, all these things are making it harder for enterprises to stay and to want to come here and to grow and to thrive. I was in Denmark a couple of years ago giving a speech, and before my remarks, I sat next to a gentleman who told me that he owned, I think it was 6 or 8 different companies. And they were through Scandinavia and parts of Europe. And he was telling me how bad the taxes are in Denmark for him personally. And I said, why don't you move to the United States and bring some businesses there? And he said, I'd never go to the U.S. because of the litigation environment in the U.S. These are wake-up call concerns, and yet we don't seem to be able to deal with them. And I fault a lot of us who've been in the political environment not to make it clear how important it is to deal with these things and to lay out proposals to actually address them. You know, I've watched the presidential debates and looked at the give and take. There's been almost no discussion of those things I've just described. The national debt and how to deal with it and reforming entitlements. I don't think either candidate for president has said they're going to reform entitlements in one way or the other. Dealing with poverty, dealing with the roots of poverty. We know, by the way, how to eliminate intergenerational poverty, but we don't. We know what it takes to fix education, but we don't. We know what it takes to actually raise wages. This is, as you know, people on the other side of the aisle have made that a centerpiece of their campaigns, which is the idea of income inequality and the lack of progress for middle-income families. And it's something which, gosh, I kick myself as a Republican nominee for president, not having done a better job communicating this. Let me describe what I mean. When you speak, as you do in a primary, to people who are strong Republicans and conservatives, you begin to speak in shorthand because they've heard the kind of remarks that I'd make. They've heard it time and again, and they sort of understand what you mean. So when I'm talking about making America the most attractive place in the world for entrepreneurs, and when I want to make America a terrific place for small business and big business, when I want to see corporations thrive and grow in America, what my primary audience hears is something which they can connect with. But the audience at large, they think the reason I'm talking about business is because all I care about is rich people and business leaders. Look, rich people and business people do well whether Republicans or Democrats in charge. The real people who suffer when business is leaving or not successful are the people in the middle class. If you want to get wages up in America for middle-income Americans, there's only one way I know how to do that in real terms. I mean, you can create inflation, and you can transfer money from one person to the other, but you don't have any real income growth in that case. The only way to get real incomes up for the middle class of America is by having more businesses want to hire more people. Because then the businesses have to compete with each other to hire people that are qualified. And in their competition, they got to pay more money to get the best people. And so wages go up. The reason we Republicans talk about making America attractive for business to grow and thrive and for investment to be successful is because we want to raise wages for middle-income Americans, and we know that's the only way to do it. The reason I'm a conservative is not because of the 1% or the corporate bosses. The reason I'm an American is for all the people of this country and recognizing that if business is thriving and growing, it'll create more jobs, raise wages of our people, allow us to care for our seniors, get a better education for our kids, and allow us to have the kind of military that can defend American interests around the world. I love this country. I love what we represent. I love what we are. I love what we've accomplished as a nation. I don't shrink from saying that America is the greatest nation in the history of the earth. No other nation has had the strength and capacity and goodness of heart to do what America has done. But I know we face extraordinary challenges, and we're not making progress against those challenges, as we should, in Washington. States are, by the way. States figured it out. Governors and legislators, Republican and Democrat, are getting the job done time and again. But the federal government is just not getting the job done. And so I salute Tom and your team and Lisa, those of you that are here today, those that are fighting, whether you're Republican or Democrat, just fight to take on the real challenges and deal with them and get these things resolved so that the energy and passion of the American people can create the businesses and grow the enterprises that will hire more people, lead to higher wages for the American people, and make sure that we can finance and maintain the great strength that is America. Thanks so much. Great to be with you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. We solicited a few questions from our members, and I'm going to take the liberty of asking you. General counsels seem to have an increasingly important role in helping to guide corporate strategies. They're in the boardroom much more now and in decisions that are being made. As a former governor and an American entrepreneur, what advice would you give to general counsels who are ILR's members to guide them into 2017?
Well, you know, I think it's helpful if general counsel have a perspective on what's happening globally, a perspective on what's happening in technology, what's happening in international competition. We face competition. America is in competition. Business understands that. States understand that because states compete with each other. I have to tell you a story. I became governor. Arnold Schwarzenegger puts up billboards in Massachusetts with him in a T-shirt flexing his muscles, and it says, "Come to California." It's like, this is a Republican governor poaching for me. So I put up billboards in his state outside the airport with me in a T-shirt, and it said, "Smaller muscles but much lower taxes, come to Massachusetts." All right. So I think people that are in the legal world have the ability to create a perspective on what's happening globally. In competition and in technology and in legal environment, and to help the enterprise make the choices as to where it's best to grow and to thrive. And right now, I think legal counsel has to make a very strong pitch to be involved in what's going on in Washington, to help people understand that if they want to see their enterprise add employment, add jobs, and raise wages, that they have to make it more attractive for the enterprise to do that business in the U.S. and as opposed to making it less attractive. And what's been happening over the last decade or so, through regulatory change, through tax policy, through litigation at the federal level, has been making it less attractive. That's why businesses are going. So I think legal counsel has the capacity to stand back from the day-to-day of operations of a business and gain a perspective on what's happening on a more global basis and help inform the board and inform management on some of those issues.
Thank you. Very helpful advice. I'm going to go with one more because I see we have just a teeny bit of time left. What is the primary reason you decided to leave the business world and try your hand at politics?
Delusion. I'm kidding about that. Look, I sort of backed into it, which is I was enjoying my business life. I love enterprise and the thrill of being in an enterprise that employs people and that creates wealth for all of those that are associated with it. But friends of mine who were in Utah were preparing to organize the Olympic Winter Games of 2002. The games were mired in scandal because there had been allegations of bribery to have the games go to Salt Lake. And the governor of the state, Mike Leavitt, approached me and said, would you consider taking on the reins of the Olympics here? And my career, my business career, was largely with turnarounds. Businesses in trouble that we invested in and then tried to turn them around. And that background he thought was helpful for the Olympics. And long story short, I took the job. Why did I go to the Olympics? I wasn't a great athlete. My sons, I got 5 boys. They know the kind of athleticism I don't have. As a matter of fact, when my oldest son heard that I'd taken the Olympic job, he said, Dad, I've called the brothers this morning. We want you to know there's not a circumstance we could have conceived of that would put you on the front page of the sports section. But I did it because I believe the Olympics was one of the few places left on the planet where young people can see the great qualities of the human spirit on display. Determination, sacrifice, teamwork, sportsmanship, and so forth. And so I thought it was important to save the games and went off to do that. And when the games were over, my state had gotten into real difficulty, financial difficulty, and the Boston Globe actually wrote an article saying, it'd be nice if the governor who's gone off and helped rescue the Olympics out there would come back here and get our state back on track. And I was persuaded by a number of folks to come back and do that. And suddenly I was now in public service. And by the way, I find the translation to be far more normal and easy than you might expect. Because people assume that if you're in business, that whatever you say has to get done automatically by the enterprise, that you're the boss if you're the CEO. Those of you who are CEOs or near CEOs understand that that's far from the truth. You've got customers, you've got unions, you've got your board of directors, you've got the bankers. I mean, the list goes on and on of the people who are your bosses. You got people inside the enterprise that want your job and it's a complicated process. In some respects, the kind of political environment that you're dealing with is a lot like in public service. And so I found that I was able to translate some of those skills to working across the aisle, if you will, to get things done in my state, and I loved it. I loved being governor. It was a fabulous experience. We accomplished a lot. I had the good fortune of having my legislature in the opposite party's hands. My Speaker of the House was a Democrat. My Senate President was a Democrat. What that meant was it taught me from the very beginning I couldn't force my way through. I had to learn to find common ground. Wish we had more people that had that experience, been able to work successfully doing that. And it allowed us to find some common. I didn't get everything I wanted done, but I got a lot done. And I happen to think some of those skills are so essential now. Are we over with time? We are. Well, let me just say this then. It's an honor to be with you. I wish I had all day. You have work to do. I'm optimistic. Again, I think America has all of the elements that are essential for us to lead in this century. And I'm optimistic that people like you are concerned about the direction the country is headed and want to make a difference. I encourage you to get involved. If you get the chance to run for president, do it. It's a great experience. You'll love it. And I'll be right there rooting for you. And, Congratulations to you. Let's work this together and make sure that America remains the hope of the earth. Thank you so much. Thanks, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you. It's terrific.